Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. So, we're here with Hanin Manjadli, a journalist and editor from Haaretz. We're here with Manisha Ganguly, visual forensics-led investigations correspondent of The Guardian, and myself, Panos Charitos, for whom you know me. I'm a journalist. I was for 15 years based as a correspondent in Middle East, in Jerusalem, and all in all, 19 years I was working in the past as a war correspondent. Let me start with a short intro about the topics and the subject of our conversation here. We're here to discuss and to examine, first of all, the ways, the reality, the difficulties, the implication and the outcome of journalism in war zones. We're here because of the last 12 months. There is a war in Gaza Strip, which is the longest in the history of Middle East between Israel and Palestine, and it's the most bloody among the civilians and reached a new level of losses among our colleagues, the journalists covering the war there. To be a journalist in general, it is tough. To be a war correspondent, it's the hardest thing, and it's very difficult to express and to share the feelings and the experience, and even if you will do it, most of the times the people around you will not believe you. They will think that you exaggerate, and that's why the most of the war correspondents, they are talking about their story and not about their personal experience during their presence on the field. I spent, as I said before, all in all 19 years covering war zones, and I can tell you that I cannot imagine how is it to cover a war without a break for 12 consecutive months, as it happens for our colleagues in Gaza right now. Twice in my life, I spent 3 months in a war zone without a break, without a day off. And I remember myself at the verge of collapse. So this is something particular and unique in Gaza. It's particular because you are alone there. There are no other foreign journalists around you. You are totally isolated and controlled, as you cannot have access to the areas you want to have access as a journalist, except the war field, and you cannot share your views, your information with other colleagues, which can have more clear approach as they are not affected by the days, the weeks, the months of the war. To understand the psychological frame in which colleagues in Gaza are operate, you need to add the number of 160 media people who lost their lives during the previous months. It's a huge number. One dead every 3 days. Try to think about it. I mean, try to make this number a picture. One dead every 3 days in a small place of the world, Gaza Strip. 160 media people, I'm saying again, and here it comes the question, what are you doing? I mean, if you are there and if you know that one journalist every 3 days, the last 12 months, losing his life, her life in a permanent base, what are you doing? You are going out again to report, to follow the story, and you are alone there, okay? Only Palestinian journalists, colleagues are there. Or you are staying inside, you are staying indoors, trying to save yourself, trying to stay safe. This is a personal question, and it has only a unique and a personal answers. In the same time, it is totally different to be a foreign journalist than to be a local who is covering a war next to his house, his neighborhood, his relatives, or his own family. As a foreign journalist, I can tell you that you don't have to worry about your wife, your kids. they're not there, they're not with you. You left them somewhere else, in some other place. So you don't have to worry about them. You are there to work, so you have clear mind, and you can focus on your assignment. The last thing I want to emphasize is the closed military zones and the control access to the media. You know that I arrived to Jerusalem 19th of September of 2000. It was the beginning, the day of the beginning of the Second Intifada. I had been to other places before, and I had quite a lot of experience in war zones. When I first started covering the Intifada, I was amazed from the ease of access to the areas. I remember covering conflicts in Ramallah, in Hebron, in Jenin, and I was starting from the Palestinian side, and then I was moving, I was walking, I was crossing the lines, and I was moving to the other side, to the Israeli lines, and I was filming, we were filming from both of the sides. It was something unique, the way that you could reach both of the sides and to make your story, to report there. It was a period of time when the media had free access, and the free access, it was real, it wasn't a title. I'm saying again, the beginning of the Second Intifada. 2 years later, and especially after the disengagement of 2005 of the Israeli settlements from Gaza, the disengagement, the standards of media access changed rapidly from the Israeli army, as a lot of the images from the field was harming the public image of IDF, but still you could enter the areas. Just it was more risky compared to the past to work there. So the reality of Gaza nowadays, more or less, I believe most of you know it. I mean, you have seen the stories, you have seen the images from the Palestinian colleagues down there. So we tried to visualize what is going on nowadays in Gaza Strip. So let's start from Gaza Strip directly. A few days ago, actually 10 days ago, we had a live connection through satellite with Sami Abu Salem. Sami Abu Salem is a Palestinian colleague that he is working for a Palestinian news agency, Wafa. He lives in northern Gaza, so I asked him if he could come to central Gaza, and it was an issue for him to move from northern Gaza to central Gaza for the live connection, but he managed to do it. And we had this conversation you are going to see about how journalists, local journalists, Palestinian journalists, they're following the conflict there, how they can report, what are the difficulties, what are them reality.
Actually, now I am here at Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital, here in the central of the Gaza Strip. Why I am here in the hospital? To overcome one of the main obstacles in the way of the working of the journalists. We as journalists come here to the hospital because there is electricity here and there is internet. Another example why we come here. Right now, or minutes ago, there was an airstrike, a second airstrike. The first one was about an hour ago, and people went there. One citizen was killed. Journalists went there, and people went there to inspect the rubble. There is a house was bombed, a rubble. After about 30 minutes, another strike happened on the same place. We as journalists, we cannot go there because we believe that bombing is coming. That's why lots of stories, that's why lots of incidents we cannot cover. The main obstacle in our work is killing. That's why we are scared all the time. We are spending lots of time just to avoid bombing, avoid rockets, avoid killing. I personally, myself, I hear lots of alleged stories of execution. I did not publish it. Why? Because I have to verify. And verification needs internet and needs electricity and needs transportation. Another one of the obstacles, displacement. I have been displaced from my house about 11 times. From north of Gaza to the house of my brother, then to the hospital, and we slept in open air. When it was cold in October, then I moved to the middle areas, to the house of my uncle, back to the south, and now I came back here to the central area of Gaza.
What is the routine of the journalists there?
Most of journalists are living in tents or in the hospital itself. And while I'm looking for a place to stay, I knock the doors of owners of houses. Excuse me, I would like to rent your house. He said, okay, you are welcome. Then he realized that I'm a journalist. Oh, you are a journalist? No, get out. I will not allow you to rent my house. Because they believe that journalists are a target. After that, I will begin to follow how to work on this story, for example, today is the first day of the school year in Gaza, but more than 500,000 students could not go because of war and because of vaccination of polio and because of the schools are destroyed. So I have to work on a story about that. So I just knock the door of any house around me. I do not go far around me to find any student, a boy or a girl. Why you are not going to school? How do you feel that all people are going to school while you are not? What about your school, destroyed or not? Have you lost some classmates? So I just catch the tip of the story.
For someone who lives in Gaza, like you, like other colleagues, how easy is to deal with your personal concerns?
Nowadays, in this war, it is similar to suicide mission. Some people go with the rescue teams and they die. And some journalists in the beginning of war, they were very brave. Any bombing, they just grab the camera and run and take pictures. Now they are not. Scared. People are scared. Even especially at night when I am at home, like what happened a couple of weeks ago, I was at home and I have heard big explosion. As a journalist, I have to go to see what happened. I have to go to take pictures or meet people or to call colleagues what happened. I didn't, because I'm so scared.
The absence of the foreign media, the foreign correspondents, the absence of them, how is influenced the coverage of the story in Gaza?
Yeah, unfortunately, Israel does not allow foreign journalists to come to Gaza. That's why most of reports get out of Gaza are by Palestinians. The Israelis claim that the Palestinian journalists lying or exaggerating. Okay, let the foreign journalists come from America, from UK, from Greece, from Athens to cover. And we believe that reports written or made by foreign journalists would be much stronger than materials by Palestinian journalists. We stopped the Israeli elite to say that the Palestinian journalists are lying or exaggerating. So we are eager that the foreign, European or Latin America, whatever, foreign journalists, we would like them to come to Gaza to see with their own eyes.
Sami Abu Salem, thank you very much for this interview. I really appreciate the fact that you moved there in central Gaza to have this interview, to have the opportunity to talk with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody.
So this is the reality of Gaza. I mean, a short story, but it was tough to take it out. I mean, to manage to connect with Gaza and to communicate and to move people from northern part of the city to central Gaza. It's one of the biggest projects of the current time in Gaza of nowadays. Let's move now to the West Bank. Let's move with the eyes of Hanin Majadli. Hanin born in Haifa, if I'm right, and she lived there until she moved to Tel Aviv. She has a Palestinian origin and she's an Israeli citizen. So let's see from her eyes the reality of people with a double identity in a place like Israel, how they can approach the news, how you can report there for things that happen in not so far from the place that you live, and on the other hand, the filters that the place that you based are not accepting the reality of the ground in Gaza, of the ground operations in Gaza. So, Hanin Majadli.
First thing, I'm very happy to be here, even in these very hard times where Gaza is still bombed and also Lebanon. Not easy to be Palestinians traveling and away from home. You asked me before we came here about you said two questions, asked two questions about the West Bank and about the coexistence in Israel. I want to start with the coexistence because it's usually what I write about as Palestinians who live in Israel and who studied in the universities and work in the only liberal newspaper in Israel. There is no coexistence in Israel between Palestinians or Arabs, as they call us, Arab Israelis, because this coexistence is under conditions. You have to be without a political identity, without national identity. Don't be Palestinian, be just Israel Arab. You can be Arab Muslim or Arab Christian. You have the freedom of religion, but don't be Palestinian. Don't be political and don't be vocal. And in a country that they have a white and Jewish supremacy, there is no place for coexistence. Just in one case that you say, I take and I accept this, I agree for these conditions, and even then, you're still not fully citizens because you're not Jewish. So in these circumstances, I don't think that there is coexistence. Also, and especially because after the 7th of October, any Palestinians inside Israel who dared to say there is a genocide on Gaza and stop the war, even if he was journalist, a professor in the university, student, he was hunted not only by the state and the police, but also by colleagues, Jewish and Israeli colleagues. So it's very hard for me, to know that some people think that there is coexistence in such a place where I live, 40 minutes away from Gaza. A genocide is happening for my people. Why, if they do this to people in Gaza, they did it also in 48, and they also can do it for me one day. That's about the coexistence. And about what's going on in the West Bank, it's not my field. I write about the Palestinians inside of Israel.
The most important, sorry that I interrupt you, but the most important, just for the people to understand as well, because we're talking about Gaza, and all the eyes are, directed in Gaza Strip and to the war there. So, in the same time, you have difficulties in the West Bank, okay? So, how is it to report from there? I mean, from colleagues, from people that you know, I don't know, Israelis, Israeli Palestinians, foreigners that they are based in Jerusalem. How is the movement between Palestinian cities, between Palestinian villages, that is in between Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestine in West Bank? So how is it to report from there?
Basically, to cover the West Bank, you need a permission from the Israeli army. And I don't think a lot of Jewish Israeli journalists go like physically to the West Bank to cover, because actually they don't care about it. I think they know what's going on in Gaza, in the West Bank, from the military and from soldiers, and also from Palestinians. And we see this also in Gaza. We see Palestinians, every Palestinian become a journalist, you know, because people film what's happened to them, with their phones. So I know about what's going on in Masafer Yatta, in Hebron, because of Palestinian activists, not because of Israeli journalists. They don't care about what's going on in the West Bank. And the more the genocide on Gaza is deepening, the state violence with the settler violence, actually, it goes together. So it's not a settler violence that the state, like Israel, the official Israel say there is a settler violence and there is like the army. They cooperate in making Palestinian life miserable and bearable in the West Bank, especially while the genocide is going on and all the, people's eyes are on Gaza, so no one knows how is frightening to be Palestinian in the West Bank. People are closed in their homes. People don't work because there is no Palestinian economics. Like the majority of Palestinians work in Israel. And since the war, there's no, they don't give.
There's no movement.
Yeah, there's no movement. Palestinians don't work. So covering Gaza, covering the West Bank is actually a little bit like covering Gaza. It's still not 100% forbidden, but it's an opportunity for Israel to build more settlement there and to extend their presence.
And more restrictions and.
More,
so
for sure.
I will ask you to put a comma here. So, because we have to talk to Yumna El-Said, which is in Cairo. So she's with us through Zoom, Skype, whatever. So we can see her. Yumna El-Said, correspondent of Al Jazeera English. She's from Gaza. She's Gazan Egyptian. She's nominated for the Emmy Awards. She was on her way to United States of America, but for some reason she's stuck in Cairo, and she's here with us, and we're very happy to have her with us. Good evening from Athens, Yumna.
Good evening. Good evening to you all. It's a pleasure to be joining the forum, the IMED forum, and I'm really sad that I couldn't make it in person. As you mentioned, I was supposed to be also in the United States for the Emmy Awards ceremony, but unfortunately, because my passport is still at the US Embassy until now, I did not receive my passport. I was not able to travel, and I was not able to make it to the US or even to Athens for the forum.
So Yumna, just for you to know, she spent 3 months. I mean, from the beginning of the war in Gaza, 7th of October, 3 more months. She was there with her family. She's a mother of 4 kids. And finally, after all, she managed to leave Gaza. It wasn't easy, so I will not give more details. It's up to her what she wants to share with us. So we're here to listen your story, and I would appreciate if you could give us a bit of the idea, because I have been there. I know how is it to be there, but I said it before, I don't know if you listen, that it's totally different to be a foreigner than to be a local, because you have your family, you have your relatives. So how it goes for you to be in Gaza, to report a war, and we're talking about a real war here, it's not a PlayStation, this thing, and to think about your kids that they're back home and your neighborhood is bombed, and I don't know, we're ready to listen here.
Well, actually, being a Palestinian journalist, especially in the Palestinian territories, whether in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, in East Jerusalem, these parts have all been completely divided from each other by the Israeli army and Israeli government. But being a Palestinian journalist in Gaza, excuse me, isn't like any other place in the world. Because as simple as I can put it, being a Palestinian journalist in Gaza means that you are a legitimate target to the Israeli army at all times. I have covered dozens of escalations in Gaza in the past 8 years of my job as a journalist who lives in Gaza, a resident of Gaza. Every single time there was an escalation against Gaza, media offices were always targeted. And there was no huge international attention towards the fact that media offices are being bombed every single time there's an escalation. This is something that has been going on for years until this war, or to call it with its true name, a genocide, because until now, if foreign media has failed to address it with the correct term and definition as a genocide, is just being a kind of the many kinds of misinformation and disinformation that has been communicated over and over again since the beginning of this genocide on the Gaza Strip. When you target media offices, when you target the journalists themselves, their families in their homes, when you threaten them, when a Palestinian journalist feels that he is not safe, neither in the field nor his family is safe in their home, then that is just the situation that any human being can take. And yet, we have continued to report. We have continued to report with very limited equipment, because from the first week of the war, our media offices were completely destroyed. We were not even given time to take the needed equipment and the needed tools and whatever machines that we need for our coverage when before they were bombed. I'm one of the people who, in the first week of the war, I lost my press vest, my press helmet, my laptop, everything else that I used as a correspondent, just because they give us 5 minutes to evacuate, and you are in that sense of chaos where you're basically running for your life. And you don't even think about what to take with you and what not to take with you. And this is not the first time or second or even 10th time. This has been going on over and over again. So despite even that fact, as being the journalist in the field, taking the best precaution measures, if there are any, being labeled as a journalist in that very heavy press vest that you make yourself wear every single day for very long hours, and that press helmet, you are hurting from how much time you have to spend with. But yet, the sense of worry and fear and terror that your family, your loved ones are not safe where they are, or you might not return to them and find them alive, that was something that was the heaviest thing for me as Yumna, the journalist, the mother, the person, to bear. And it was always something in the back of the mind of every single Palestinian journalist out there in the field. I've watched dozens of colleagues. Mohammed Al-Alul, he lost his entire family, his 4 children killed in an airstrike on his home. Mu'min Al-Shirafi, my colleague in Al Jazeera, Arabic, over 23 people of his family killed. Muhammad Abu Qumsan, over 21 people of his family killed. Wa'il al-Dahdouh, the entire world has seen what has happened Sometimes the media, some of these journalists are privileged enough because the media highlights very much what has happened to them, but there are dozens more that what has happened to them isn't even reported. I lived the same situation. I lived the same fear, the same devastation when I was threatened at home with my family, when I was given 5 minutes under sniper bullets to escape my home with my children, just for the fact that I'm a journalist. Punishing you for a role, a duty that you are doing, you are risking your life to do at the worst time, the most difficult time, in the most immense time, with all these struggles and challenges of an ongoing genocide, but at the same time, you're being punished for informing the world, for saying out the truth, and for keeping people informed about what's happening.
I don't know, because you grew up in Gaza, I mean, this is not the first war. 2009, I mean, okay, leave the second intifada on the side, but 2009, it was a big war and it was without foreign media inside there. So maybe one or two foreign journalists in 2009, 2013, maybe some more, but still, you had some foreign journalists to report from there. And the current war, it's totally different. I mean, this is the total destruction, and what this war is leaving behind, it's difficult to describe it. But you see any different approach from the foreign media as well on how they're turning the eyes, how they're approaching the Palestinian issue after the 7th of October towards Gaza war?
Well, it's the problem with how the foreign media or international Western media is dealing with the issue of this genocide on the Gaza Strip is extremely frustrating for me as a journalist, because it completely eliminates any principles, the true principles and integrity of journalism. Because it's very easy for any human being, any person in this world, when you come and read two headlines, a headline written about an attack in Israel and another headline written about an attack in Gaza. The one that is written about the attack in Israel, the names of the casualties are mentioned. They're mentioned that they are how the attack happened, who carried the attack, what the attack caused. All this is mentioned in that headline. That headline humanizes the attack, humanizes the casualties, the people who are either injured or killed by the attack. The word itself, the term itself, killed by a Palestinian rocket or Palestinian attack. This is the term always used to define such attacks. But come to another headline that's written about an enormous attack, not just a regular one, in Palestine or in Gaza in particular, where over 100 people are killed by an Israeli strike on tents of the displaced, or children beheaded in those tents and burned alive, or a strike, a direct strike on a resident's home without prior notice, leaving a number of children, women and men killed. And the most casualties in Gaza are among children and women, because they're the ones who are at home. Usually, they're the ones in the tents, they're the ones in the places or the areas of staying. The men are usually trying to get something for them, water or food or anything. It's a constant search. It's a non-stop search in Gaza every single moment for water and food. But then come and read that line, that headline. It's usually Palestinians died It's always died. It's never killed. It's never by an Israeli airstrike on a residential home.
Okay.
And as a journalist, you know very well the importance of your words, the importance you as a journalist have, as any journalist, you have that ability to manipulate people by your words. And if you don't have that integrity and that honesty, that people are trusting you with the information that they get from you as a journalist, so they want to get the true information correctly and biased, impartial, objectively, from both sides, then you are not worth that trustworthy that people have put in you.
Right.
Palestinian journalists, for example, are always being it's always being said that Palestinian journalists' story is not credible enough. And the news that is coming out of Gaza is not credible enough because there are no Western journalists there. Although these Western journalists have a lot of footage to see for their own eyes and write the story correctly. And the Palestinian journalist, when a Palestinian journalist is reporting about what's happening from the Palestinian side, just like what's happening from the Israeli side, then that Palestinian journalist is credible enough. It is not your nationality that defines if you are a good, trustworthy journalist or not. It is your work. It is your honesty that you are reporting the truth to the people, regardless of what your nationality is, where you are, and why you're doing it. You are doing it. You should only have that one principle, that you're reporting what's happening, what you see with your own eyes and hear with your own ears. And if that, for the Western and international media, is not enough, then they should have fought harder for their right that Israel has taken away from them by force and suppressed them and suppressed their freedom of speech and entered into Gaza themselves. They should have fought for that right.
Yumna and Said, thank you very much. So, you listen to the reaction. Thank you very much for your participation in this IMET project.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much from Athens for your participation. And ladies and gentlemen, as the time goes by, let's move forward. Let's go to Manisha Ganguly. And the last part of this conversation, I mean war crimes. There is no discussion about war without war crimes. And if we're coming to the part of the war crimes, what are the tools to investigate, how you can investigate, and how you can proceed after that?
So I've been investigating war crimes in Gaza over the last 9 months. So I'm going to try and fit that in 10 minutes as quickly as possible. So firstly, as you know, Egypt and Israel have blocked access to foreign journalists into Gaza, which means for most of my investigations, and I don't do pure open source because I think the tools aren't the means to an investigation. You need to be able to combine visual investigations with on-ground reporting to provide the most irrefutable evidence beyond a reasonable doubt if you're holding a nation state to account, especially one like Israel, with such good lawyers. And then the second problem is, of course, you're relying on civilians who are being killed, being starved, journalists whose entire homes are being destroyed, their families are being destroyed, and of course, there's the constant telecoms blackout, which means communication is fundamentally difficult. But I'm going to be quick and tell you about 2 investigations that we worked on. The first was I mapped a period of 5 weeks to look at the impact on 10 hospitals in the northern Gaza Strip, and in those 5 weeks, about 8 of them had become completely inhospitable, and that was done by analyzing 200 pieces of evidence, and what we found was that the only 2 pediatric hospitals in the Strip, the only cancer hospital in the Strip, and the only psychiatric hospital in the Strip was already out of function within the 2nd month of the war at the start of November, which means that under international humanitarian law, hospitals have special protection and must not be used as military targets. When we went and asked the IDF, they said that Hamas was firing rockets nearby, but I found evidence of Israeli munitions being fired on maternity wards at Al-Shifa Hospital. There was a specific strike outside Al-Shifa, which you might remember if you've been following it closely, where there was a convoy of ambulances from Red Crescent which were hit. The IDF released a statement saying that Hamas was being transported inside the ambulance. I acquired a video of who was inside the ambulance, and they mostly looked like civilians. None of them were wearing military uniforms. There were no visible weapons. So that is kind of the level at which you're operating in this war. By December, this war had killed over 100 journalists. Journalists have special protection under international humanitarian law as civilians, and therefore they must be, the Israeli military maintains that they do not have a practice of targeting press personnel. The Committee to Protect Journalists, which lists and collates the number of civilian casualties in war, said that this is the deadliest war in history since the start of CPJ. So we decided to find out why so many journalists were dying. So the Guardian teamed up with ARIJ, which is the Arab Investigative Journalists Network, and the French NGO Forbidden Stories, which pursues the work of targeted journalists alongside Paper Trail Media. So we had a consortium, and we had one mission, which is to find out why our Palestinian colleagues were dying. And what we classified it into two different categories. 30% of the journalists who've died in Gaza worked for Hamas-aligned media. Now, we went and asked the IDF, what is your targeting policy when it comes to journalists who are aligned with or working for Hamas-run outlets? The IDF spokesman told us that they do not see any difference between journalists that are aligned with Hamas and members or militants of Hamas. We published a story with this headline. 6 hours later, the IDF released a press statement saying that the spokespersons misspoke to us on the record and that their words do not characterize IDF targeting policy. That's part one. Part two, Press House, completely non-partisan. It was an incubator which was funded by Swiss and Norwegian NGOs. It's essentially, if you're a young journalist growing up in Gaza, this is where you would go to get your training. Every single image that you're seeing of journalists getting killed in Gaza has a light blue flak jacket. All of these flak jackets come from Press House. They handed out 89 press jackets for every single Palestinian journalist and set up an emergency press room at the start of the war. They continue to operate well into November, and the founder is a brilliant man called Bilal Jadallah who died. And I'll tell you how he died and why so many journalists are dying. It's the perfect example. Bilal had refused to leave because he felt an obligation to stay for these journalists that he had trained. But by that point, all of these journalists were convinced that they were being systematically targeted by the IDF for being journalists. So Bilal decided to evacuate. Now, the way you evacuate in Gaza right now is, you must have seen that Israel has been dropping leaflets and asking people to move south. The way you move south in Gaza is through a designated safe route, a highway called Salah ad-Din Road. The IDF have been putting out safe hours when you can evacuate. Bilal packed his bags with his ID and traveled down the road. This route, again, I repeat, was marked safe by the IDF. His car was hit. We did weapons analysis on the car and found, I spoke to two different weapons experts, one who worked for the US Army and the other who worked for the British military, and both of them said that there was a very, very high possibility that his car was hit by an Israeli tank shell. Bilal died on the spot. He bled to death. If you're a journalist in Gaza, if you're aligned with Hamas in any way, which is entirely possible because the entire region is controlled by Hamas and it's very difficult to operate without paying allegiance to that government, then you're in the 30% and you will be seen as a target. If you're the 70% and you're a non-partisan journalist, you will probably die while trying to evacuate because there is no safe space in Gaza to evacuate from. Now, the IDF, however, maintains that it does not target personnel. And it also said that surgical strikes are really difficult, but we have seen evidence of the apartments of journalists being surgically hit, where the apartment is on the first floor and the entire building is intact, but just the floor where the journalist was living is gone. So it is not that the Israeli military is incapable of doing surgical strikes when it is needed. And then I've also done quite a lot of investigations into the Jabalia refugee camp, which was hit about between 7 to 9 times. It was hit about 2 times while I was investigating. And what we are seeing is a lack of proportionality, where they are targeting a senior Hamas commander, which is one target, and hitting the entire area with 2,000-pound US-made bombs. And these are leveling about 8 buildings at a time and killing around 250 to 300 people. Obviously, it's very difficult because I can only see what's happening on satellite imagery and videos. I cannot see the tunnels under the ground. And therefore, there is still that reasonable doubt, which is when the IDF comes back and says that they're hitting the tunnels. However, there is an argument to be made about whether the IDF is making any calculations of proportionality, because over 100 journalists have been killed, 35,000 civilians have been killed, 35,000 people have been killed in Gaza. 89% of them are civilian casualties. We do not have any independent records of this, so all of this is coming from the Gaza Health Ministry run by Hamas.
Wow.
I would love to add something about covering the genocide from the Israeli media. You guys here might mistakenly think that Israelis journalists go to university and study journalism, and that's how they become a journalist. But Israelis start their journalism career in the IDF spokesperson units and communication units, and that's how they start their career in journalism. Like majority of the Israeli journalists started their career in the Israeli army units. So they are part of this system that, enrolled in the genocide, and they can't criticize it. And even we think, why the Israeli government and also the army, they're not letting foreign journalists to cover what's going on in Gaza. Do you know that not even one protest from Israeli journalists was made to let them cover what's going on in Gaza, even after the deadly attacks on, for example, the Nusayrat camp? Like on the mainstream Israeli media, it was a reality show in that day. So they are not interested. It's not that the army not allowing them. They're not interested because there is a wide agreement on this genocide. So I would, as a Palestinian and as a human, to ask the world to put pressure on the state of Israel to stop the genocide, to let foreigners, journalists, to cover what's going on Gaza, since also the army is just killing the remain Palestinian journalists in Gaza. Thank you so much.
You want to add something on that? Yeah.
Just on that note, The Guardian, along with a bunch of other foreign media organizations, have signed an open letter to Bibi when he was in Washington, and have been lobbying with the Committee to Protect Journalists, because fundamentally, if we do not have access, then we cannot, for me, as a war crimes investigator, I cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt, which means I cannot make a case. But I think if you look at the telecoms blackout, if you look at the lack of access to foreign journalists, if you look at the way Palestinian journalists are being killed, I think the fundamental question here is the question that the Committee to Protect Journalists have been asking, which is, what do they not want us to see?
As we see, we have a few more minutes, so...
Good.
So you want to answer?
What's the question?
No. As we see, we have a few more minutes, so
time.
I want to add something more. If you want to add to the topic of Anissa.
I wanted, like in the start, I wanted to talk a little bit also about the unbearable situation of Palestinian citizens of Israel who from the first day in this war, we knew how things gonna escalate. You know, we live in this country, and we've been in many wars on Gaza in the past 20 years. So we silenced ourselves before anything happened, because you know that while the Israeli army is killing Palestinians, the Israeli community and the Israeli citizens and Jewish colleagues in universities and in some mixed cities, you know, usually they are Palestinian cities, but you know, with also Jewish population. They will attack as you know, as a part of the revenge, as part of the violence atmosphere. They will attack Palestinian Israeli citizens because they live there. So what was going on since October last year, that Palestinian Israeli citizens were hunted in universities, students for posting on social media, doctors for, I don't know, uploading Quran, for saying, stop the war. That's also an answer for the coexistence. Palestinians in Israel in good days classified as Class B citizens and potentially enemies. And in emergency time like wars, they are treated as enemies. So I know that there is this mistakenly maybe idea about that in Israel there are liberals who are against their government and its actions on Gaza, and therefore there are some coexist. Yeah, it's not the same on the ground.
Okay, and my last question, as I see we have 5 more minutes to Manisa. You know, we're talking about war crimes. You have quite enough experience on the investigating journalism. So, first time we start talking about war crimes in Middle East, it was Iraq war. And now we start searching what is going on in Gaza Strip. At the same time, we have the war in Ukraine. And you know, the tactics between Israeli army and the forces that they're fighting between them in Ukraine are pretty much similar. So I don't know if you have any examples, any common tools. I mean, how we're investigating what is going on in Gaza. You gave the example before. How we're investigating what is going on in Ukraine. You see common tactics between the two powers that they're fighting on the ground?
I think there are sort of 2 commonalities. So I started working on Syria, Libya, Ukraine, and this is sort of the 4th one that I'm doing war crimes investigations on. The Syrian civil war was sort of a test case because it was the first most documented war. And then you had Ukraine, and then you have Gaza. But Gaza is unique because the entire telecoms infrastructure in Gaza is entirely controlled by Israel, which means they can cut it off at any moment. We have seen instances of even, not even journalists, people. So you have civilians who are becoming journalists, as Haneen said, but then there are influencers, Instagram influencers, who are describing being followed by drones because of the lives that they're doing. But there's that commonality in Russian forces in Syria and then Russian forces in Ukraine. They're both targeting medical infrastructure. When it comes to Gaza, it becomes slightly different and more complex because all 3 of these investigations were done using satellite imagery, sources on the ground, and videos that were uploaded. I'm doing the exact same methodology in Gaza, except the problem is that I cannot see below the ground where they are saying that there are Hamas tunnels. So when I get a response back saying that there are tunnels underneath, I have no way of verifying it. I have no way of fact-checking it, and they won't let me in So there is no way of knowing. And it's the same when you're looking at the journalists who are being killed, who are being called Hamas. Like, let's look at Wael's eldest son, Hamza Dadoo, who was killed. And they said that he was allied with a militant group. And the evidence that was provided was an extremely pixelated, distorted image of him apparently being on the payroll. We asked the IDF for additional information, and they didn't. And their excuse a lot of the time was that they're fighting a war, and that is a very valid excuse. But fundamentally, journalists are protected as civilians. So if you're doing a targeted strike on a journalist, it is imperative that you release the intelligence that that strike was authorized on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Manisa. Thank you very much, Hanin. Thank you very much, all of you. And here we came to the end of the first part covering Gaza war. Thank you very much.